Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session for the Introduction to Bulk Mailer Professional. Today we're going to cover the program and the various type of outputs, postage reports, mail.xml, mail.dat, etc., that you can make with the program. Before we get started, a couple of notes about our session here. I've got quite a few. We've got quite a few attendees today, so what I'd like you to do is, if you have a question, please enter your question into the chat window. So if you look on the GoToMeeting menu, you'll see an option there for chat, and you can send a message to me, and I'll stop and review those questions between each one of the sections of the program that we're going to present today. So start off. Let me know if you have any trouble hearing my voice. Go ahead and pop that into the chat window, and we make some recommendations on that. So the program here, Bulk Mailer, is intended for preparing mailings, but can also be used for doing sort of basic data quality processing. And we've kind of got two different user classifications that typically use this program. So pay attention when I'm describing something and see which one of these categories you fit into. The program gets used by people who are in what we call the mail service provider category. And these are people that, or these are companies that do mailings for outside entities. So they do mailings as a service that they provide to outside companies. You know, people come in their front door and they pay them to create a mailing. You're in what we call the mail service provider category. So you'll be referred to sometimes as the mailing agent, the mail preparer, or the mail service provider. The other category would be companies that just do mailings for their own list. So that would be companies like water companies, insurance companies, banks, basically any company where you're just doing the mailings just for your list only. Sometimes universities, I think, would fall into that category as well. So you're not doing mailings for hire for outside companies, you're just doing mailings for yourself. In that case, kind of the keywords that we look for as we go through the material would be the mail owner. You're still considered a mail preparer, but you're not the mailing agent, you're not a mail service provider. So if you hear those terms come up, then you'll know which ones, which category you fall into. All right, so the screen here I've got displayed is the opening screen for Bulk Mailer. And if we look over on the left-hand side, you'll see these are the steps that you would go through in order to prepare a mailing. So importing, viewing to look at the address, to look at the input addresses, address quality steps, grouping of addresses, mail sorting, printing. And so these are all the steps you would take in order to prepare a mailing. Over on the right, what we've got here is a list of mailing jobs that I've previously run in this program or this instance of Bulk Mailer. And so each one of these kind of represents a single job. You'll notice down here on the bottom of the screen, it gives you some information about the status of that job. So for example, I can see back on May 16th, I ran address correction. I ran move update, it found 10 moves. Here's the mail sorting. If I click the reprint reports, I can actually get back to my postage statements that I generated at that time. So each one of these is basically a mailing job, and all of the address data that's been updated, all of the reports that are generated, everything stays within that mailing job. And that's a nice benefit. So it kind of acts like a nice archive of everything that transpired for that particular job. And these are the kind of things you want to hang on to. But if you left them all in this main home screen, they would start to fill up the screen, and pretty soon, you'd run out of space to see them all. So for that reason, we provide this folders option over here, and you can actually create folders and then move these mailing files into the subfolders. So for example, here's a folder I've called 2016. And if you look in here, these are all the jobs that were modified on 2016. Here's one for 2017, 2018, etc. The My Mailings folder is actually the default folder. So when we open the program, we're actually seeing one of the folders, the one that's called My Mailings. Folders can be created by right-clicking in this pane, choosing Add a Folder. And so I've seen a lot of clients like to maybe um, create folders based on the name of one of their customers. So in this case, I've got the Acme Incorporated company, and I want to, these jobs are done. I just want to get them out of this main screen. So I'm going to create it. So I created this Acme folder, and now I'm going to just drag these in there. So you can see I can bring them in, can highlight and grab more than one using either the Shift key or the Control key, and then drag them in there. So you can see how now I've kind of cleaned up this screen. If somebody calls and wants to know, hey, did this address actually get mailed as part of that mailing back in August? I can click on the Acme folder and I can see that here's the August newsletter. From here, I can see the data, and I can search for that person's name. I can see what the barcode was, what the condition of the address was. I can see what tray it was sent to. So all of that information gets nicely saved in these mailing files. And again, for that reason, you want to kind of keep them as archives. But again, you don't want to have them clutter up your main screen. So for that purpose, we've got these subfolders. If you decide you don't like a subfolder, you can right-click on it. You can edit to change the name, or you can delete the folder. If you choose to delete the folder, you get an option to delete all the mailings in it. So that might come in handy. Say the 2016 folder. Nobody's going to ask me about those mailings because they're too old. So I'm just going to right-click that folder and delete the entire folder along with the mailings. And so that's a nice, easy way just to clean out a bunch of old mailing files. In this case, I'm just going to create I'm just going to delete the mailings, and it's going to move them back into that main screen. So I'm going to do delete folder. And if we go back to my mailings, you can see my Acme jobs are back here in the main screen. So you have a lot of options there. Now talking about the mailing files themselves, bulk mailer, they have two states. They can either be closed or open. So if I double click on this one here, for example, you'll notice it's now in bold, and that indicates that it's the mailing file that's open. We also put the name of the file down here in this data details box. If I double click on this one, I'll get a question. Do I want to close the first one and open the second one? And I say yes on that, and you'll see that this one is now in bold. So the rule is you can only have one mailing file open at a time, and the mailing file that's open is the one that's going to be impacted by any of the steps that we take here along the left. So that's a good thing, because that way there's no chance you can inadvertently update the wrong mailing file. And it's pretty obvious to see which one's the one that's open. It's up here in bold, and it's also indicated down here in the mailing, under mailing. All right, what about creating a brand new mailing file? I'm going to close this one. I'm going to right click on it. I get some options here. I hit close. And to create a new mailing file, I'm going to use the new mailing wizard. And click next. We have some options to choose here. We'll go ahead and stick with the default option of creating a blank mailing. And the program's going to offer us a name for this mailing file composed of the date and the current time and local system. But we can just type right over the top of that with our own name. So what are we in? We're in June. So we'll call this one the June session file 1. I do finish on that, and there's our mailing file. So every job you start is going to start with this process of creating the mailing file. Now you'll notice that there's 0 addresses in it because we haven't done any importing, but you got to think of it this way. You have to sort of create the container that's going to hold the addresses and all the reports and all the address change information. They all need to be contained within the mailing file. And so the first step on any job is to start with the mailing, creating the mailing file itself. Okay, now that we've done that, we'll go ahead and do some importing. We'll bring in some addresses. So for that purpose, I'm going to use the import wizard. First item on the agenda is to select a file. I've got a couple here. We'll notice that bulk mailer can import data from a number of different file types. So we have fixed, width, text files, Excel, DBase, Microsoft Access. You can actually import from another bulk mailer file, which is the actual raw or the native database. It's called the .bmf. For today, we're going to let's grab this CSV file. And so that's been done. Now we've selected the file we're going to import from. We click next. This first screen, it shows you a picture of what's in that file. This is the way that file would look if I opened it with Notepad. It's a CSV file. Think of it as a comma separated values. And so you can see here the first name, comma, last name, comma, business. So these are pretty common in the industry. People, they're really nice and lightweight. You don't need all the overhead of an Excel file, and you don't need any of the formatting or the formulas or any of the hidden features and named ranges and those sort of things that can sometimes confuse the data transfer process using Excel. So CSV files are pretty common, but of course we can import from an Excel file as well. If we click next here, you'll see the delimiter that's been chosen is the comma. That's the correct one. If it was incorrect, you see how the input here would get all smashed together into just one field. But we're telling it that the delimiter between the fields is a comma, so it breaks it up by these columns. The other important thing we're doing on this screen is indicating the status of that first row. So I'm going to go ahead and click previous here. So again, this is the way the file would look if we just opened it with Notepad. You'll notice the first row is not an address. The first row is actually what we call a column header or a field name. And we need to tell bulk mailer that that first row is indeed not an address. That way it knows to use it as the column header. If that was not set correctly, then bulk mailer would go ahead and use these generic column headers. So if you happen to have a file that doesn't have a column header, then you'll have to uncheck this row, tell it not to treat the first row as or uncheck this box, telling it not to treat the first row as an address, but rather, or as a column header, but rather to treat it as an address. Fortunately for us here, we've got the first row does include a column header, so we'll check that box, and that'll make it a little bit easier to see what's going on when we do the linking. So that's all we need really on this screen. This one here, this field qualifier, you can go ahead and leave that on double quote. Some CSV files will have, what that means is some CSV files will have a double quote around the field, and that's just another way to be sure that the fields are kind of self-contained, and if there happens to be a comma in the middle of that field, it won't get misconstrued as another delimiter. In this case, it doesn't look like there's any double quotes in it, but it doesn't hurt to have that set to double quote. So if you do run across a field that has double quotes, it'll know to take them out because they're not actually part of the data. They're actually part of what we call a field framing character or a field qualifier. Okay, this screen here is called the mapping screen or the linking screen. This is a very important screen, and I want to make sure we get this right before we actually run the importing. So over on the left here where it says source, it's referring to our source file. So that's the CSV file that we're importing from. Here in the middle, this one that says bulk mailer, these are the bulk mailer fields that are in that mailing file that we created at the first step. So when we created the mailing file, we actually created, you can think of it like a giant Excel spreadsheet with all of these fields in it. And the object of the game here is to match up or to link the field names from our source file to the appropriate field name in bulk mailer, so that when we run the importing process, it'll pull the data out of the source file and put it into the right field in bulk mailer. Now over here, we show the source file again a second time, but in this case, we only show the fields that are currently mapped or linked to the bulk mailer file. That is also indicated by these little chain links over here. So what this is showing me is that bulk mailer automatically linked up the first name in our source file to the first name field in bulk mailer. So bulk mailer, it knows to look for some common field names, and it will grab those field names and do the linking automatically. Now you'll notice on some of these other ones here, mailing address 1, mailing city, these here wasn't too sure about, so it's decided to wait for the human to do the actual linking on those fields. But this is just a kind of a good demonstration that sometimes it'll automatically link them, but it's not going to automatically link all of them necessarily. And you may want to review them in case, for example, it's not uncommon to see sometimes the input list has 2 different addresses. They have maybe a property address and a mailing address, or a physical address and a mailing address. And so you want to make sure you get the right address linked up to bulk mailer so that when it's time to do the address correction and the labeling, the address labeling, that we're using the correct delivery address. So the other thing that we give you here is if you hover over these, it gives you a little picture of what's in that column. So in the first name column, if we look in there, you can see there's April, Luke, and Troy. And if we hit the previous button here, you can see here under the first name, here's April, Luke, and Troy. So it's just kind of showing you what's in that column. Again, just another visual cue to make sure you're getting your linking right. So we've got some work to do here. We've got to link up these other fields. We've got mailing address, and we can see that. That certainly looks like an address field. So we'll go ahead and link that up to address line 1. And there we go. So we highlight both of these and then click the map. And now we've got mailing address 1 is linked to the, you know what? I messed up my linking here. I hit the wrong button. So I inadvertently connected this to the first name field. So let me demonstrate how to unlink something. We can use the unmap button, or we can right click and choose to unmap it. There we go. Okay, so I've got to get my first name back to the first name field, highlight them both, and then click map. Now I'm back down to the address field, highlight, make sure they're both right across, and map those. Here's the city field. We'll map that one, state to state, map that, mailing zip code to zip code. This last field here, if we hover over this, you'll see this is an example of what we call user data. So it's non-postal information. It's not somebody's address. It's not somebody's name. It's not a business name, but it still might be information that the list owner wants to maintain with these addresses. So they want this. It might be a promotional code, might be a customer ID or VIN number or something, and they want it to stay with that address record. And it might be used in a mail merge, or it might get printed right on the envelope. But basically, they want that address to go through the processing and come out unchanged on the other side. But they want it to stay with the address that it was attached to on the way in. So when it's on the way out, they can export it and use that data. So in this case here, we're going to use the, so for this kind of purpose, we have these user text fields. So I'm going to highlight this one and put it into user text 1. If you have more than 5 of these user data fields, you can check this box down here that says show all fields. And now if we scroll down, you'll see we've got all the way up to 15 user text fields. Plus we've got a couple of user number fields and a notes field, which can be used for rather larger data. So if you have a really big blurb that you want to capture and bring through the processing, you would hook that up to the notes field. One other thing the show all fields does for us is it exposes all of the name fields. So let me uncheck that, and you'll see if it's not checked, you just get first name and last name. And for our purposes here with this list, that was fine because we had separate first name and last names. But what about the case where you have a list where the first and last name are together in the same field? Or it might be the first, the middle, and the last, and the suffix, like junior or senior or something like that. It's all presented to you as a single field. In that case, you will have to check this box that says show all fields. And then that exposes the full name field, which allows you to then map that to the full name field. If you have separates for first, middle, last, a salutation would be you can use for Mr. and Mrs. Title would be, you know, PhD or something like that. Name suffix is junior, senior, that sort of thing. So we have more fields that are available if you click the Show All Fields button. All right, now we've got everything mapped. And by the way, you don't necessarily need to map everything. If you get a file and there's 20 or 30 columns in there, but all they want you to do is just do the address labeling, then all you need to do is get the name and the address fields. You don't necessarily have to map everything. But in our case, we're going to call this a promotional code, and we want to use that on the output. So we're going to bring it in along with the rest of the data. All right. So we click next, and the summary screen, and you'll see this on pretty much all of the template screens that we have in here, is you get an option to save the template. And we'll talk about that in just a minute after we do the importing. Okay, June import 1. All right. So there we've just imported 2009 records. If we go back to the home screen, you'll see that this no longer shows 0 records. Instead, we've got 2009. And if we go forward here to the views, we can go ahead and take a look at these addresses. So we know they're in there because the record count is higher, but what about, we want to actually see the records, make sure that everything landed in the right spot. So for that, we're using this basic address view. And you can see here's April, Luke, and Troy right up there at the top. Here's addresses in the address field, city in the city field, state, zip code. So everything looks like it's landed properly. All right. Any questions with importing? We're going to go ahead and start talking about viewing, and we're going to jump back and talk about that import template that we saved in just a minute. But we're going to go through the views a little bit here and talk a little bit about what we can do in the views. Again, if you have a question, feel free to go ahead and toss that into the chat window on that Go to Meeting menu. All right, so let's talk about views. So we've been in the home screen, we created the mailing file, we did the import, we imported some address. Now, views is all about looking at the address data. I'm going to open up the actual the view called the full record view. And what this one does for you is it shows you every single column that gets created or every single field that gets created when we're in the home screen and we do New Mailing Wizard. So if we go to views here and again, we'll open that up, the full record view. We're going to see, here's that first name field. Here's the middle name, last name. Notice the full name field, we did not import data into the full name field, but yet here it is, the first and last name combined together into a full name format. The reason for that is because bulk mailer's full name field is you can think of as kind of a virtual field. It's composed of these constituent or these element name fields. Bulk mailer stitches them together, concatenates them together into the full name field. And it acts a little differently than the other fields. With these other ones, we can change the data in the field by simply double clicking in there. So here, if I come down here and change this from Danny to Dan, hit enter on that, you'll notice over here now it says Dan Glover. So the full name field shows the shows whatever happens to be in these constituent fields. And so that's handy because when it's time to print this on an address label, it's a lot easier to grab the full name field and know that it's going to be formatted correctly rather than trying to piece together all these separate little fields. So for another example, let's say a middle name was Paul. If we put that in there, you'll see now it shows Dan Paul Glover. And if you tried to put all these together in the address label layout view, you would end up trying to piece together these little boxes, and some of them would be longer, some would be shorter, and it wouldn't come out as cleanly as it would be if you used the full name field. If you have a list where you're importing the full name field, so remember I talked about in some cases you'll get a list where the first name and last name are not in separate fields, but rather they're already combined for you in the full name field. You import them into bulk mailer in the full name field. The bulk mailer is going to try to parse them out into the first and last name fields as best it can. It's going to leave the full name field just the way you imported it, so you can still use that, but it's going to do its best to try to parse out the first and last name fields. And that comes in handy if you're doing a mail merge, and let's say you want to have Dear Luke at the top of your mail merge message rather than Dear Luke Gold at the top of your mail merge message. You can also change a setting for which fields are used to create the full name, and that would be up here under Tools, Options, and Preferences. So you can see here the full name field, you have a number of different options. If you want it to be just the first and last name field, you could select this. But if you want them all stitched together, by default, it'll grab all of those fields, put them together, and then present them as the full name field. So again, the full name field, a little different than the rest of them in that it is a virtual field. If you try to change something in there, you won't be able to change it. You have to go to the actual element field to make the change. All right, moving along in the full name, in the full record view, you'll notice we have lots and lots of fields here. There's phone number fields, email fields, lots of fields that you're probably not going to use. Some get used by the address correction, some get used during move updating, some get used during mail sorting, so there's just tons of fields. Here's a city-state field, works pretty much the same way as that full name field. It's going to just be composed of whatever happens to be in the separate city-state zip code. But again, makes it easier if you're doing address layouts. You can grab this field for your layout rather than trying to stitch together the separate fields. If we go over far enough here, we'll get to the user fields. And so here's that user data that I showed you when we were doing our importing. And so you can see that gets stored over here in the user text 1 field. And we keep on going, and we've got lots and lots of fields. So here's the good thing about the full record field, or the full record view, is that you get to see all of the fields. So if you're looking for particular data, you're likely to find it. The bad thing about the full record view is that if you wanted to, say, for example, look at this user data and the person's name at the same time, you wouldn't be able to fit them on their monitor because there's just too many fields. So for that purpose, or for that reason, we provide more than one view. And so, for example, the basic address view, it just shows you the names and the addresses. The move update information view, this shows you the fields that get impacted when you run move update, and then the name and address fields. So you can see it's going to be a lot easier to find what you're looking for by using one of these views that's specific for the task at hand, rather than looking in the full record view. And not only that, you can actually modify these views. And the way you do that is by right-clicking on them and choosing Open. So if I click right-click, choose Open, I'll get to this screen here. It shows the selected fields. So these fields right here are the ones that are currently in the basic address view. These fields over here are the ones that are available and they could be added. So that user text 1 value, I want to see that. Let's say I want to see that with the person, the name. Because I may be on the phone with them and I want to be able to quickly see the name of the person and their promotional code. So what I'm going to do here is select that field, bring it over here to the selected fields, and then I use the up button to put it up in the first position. So now when we open the full record, or the basic address view, you'll see I've got user text right here next to the name field. So you can see that that going to make it a lot easier. If I'm looking for somebody, I can quickly get to their promotional code. So again, the idea of having more than one view is so that you can look at the fields of interest for a given task without having all the other fields in your way. And you can, of course, create your own views. If we use the list view wizard, click next, starts out with a blank slate, and you can just put whatever fields you want in there. And again, to modify them, we right-click, we choose Open, click Next. And so here's that user text field. Now I'm done with it. I want to get it back. I want to get it out of there. So I'm just going to highlight it and choose Unselect, and that puts us back the way we were. Some other things we can do in views. Views can be sorted and searched, kind of similar to the way you can do that with Excel. So for example, here, if I want to sort this by last name, I can highlight the column, right-click, and choose Sort Ascending, and then it puts all the addresses in the ascending order. The other thing I can do is do a find and replace. So click on the little binoculars, it brings up this screen. You can do a find, search for something. If you want to replace it, go through and search through and replace everything with the new value. And then also you can filter, and this is kind of interesting. So this brings up a concept that's in the bulk mailer database. That comes in handy. It's also part of what's behind the group section. So pay attention here. I'm going to go to City of Chicago. I'm going to find a record that has Chicago. I'm going to right-click on this. I'm going to choose Filter for records containing Chicago. So now you'll notice in my view, I have nothing but records where the city equals Chicago. And this is where the data details comes in handy. So if I look down here, the current count now shows us 156. So I still have 2009 records in the database, but currently only 156 are in what we call the active state. All of the other records, they're not deleted, but they're put into this state called inactive. And the upshot of that is that when I go to do any of these actions along the left here, such as if I was to export, or if I was to run address correction or a mail sort, it would only act upon these records that are in this active state, or the ones that are showing here in the 156. And that goes for viewing too. So when I go to view records, I'm only going to see records that are in this group of 156. So first question people ask is, how do I get back to all of my records being active? And there's 3 ways you can do that. One, if you're in the view screen, you can just simply right-click anywhere on any of the views and come down here to what it says, display all active records. So if I click on that, now I've got 2009 records active and 2009 in my total count. Not only does it bring all records active, it also puts them back into the original order they were imported in. So if we come back up here, we see April, Luke, and Troy back up at the top 3 records. So again, that was right-click, filter for records containing Washington, and then it's going to do exactly that. You can also filter for records that are blank. Exclude, let's see, where is it? Yeah, filter for records containing blanks or exclude records containing blanks. So that comes in handy sometimes if you get a list where some of the addresses are actually missing and you want to just find those or delete them. Speaking of deleting, if you have records that you want to get rid of, you can highlight the record, click the X up here, and it deletes the record. If you grab a number of them at the same time, you can delete them all. So again, if we click the single X, we delete 7 records. And if you want to delete them all, you can use this double X and boom, deletes all the records. But we don't actually delete them all the way. We put them into kind of a holding zone. If we come up here to File, Manage Deleted Records, you'll see you have an opportunity to bring them back. So I can choose to purge, which gets rid of them altogether, or I can choose to recover, and that brings them all back into the database. So when it comes to deleting records, you always have a chance to bring them back in. Now let's say that something went haywire with the way you were processing this list, and you actually want to delete the records. So in that case, we're going to delete them all. And then we're going to have to follow up here and manage deleted records and purge them. And so now there's no way, if I come back here to manage deleted records, you can see there's no way to bring them back. But I'm not too worried about it because, as you recall, I saved that import template. And watch this. So if I double click on this, I can go step through my import process. Notice it's still pointing at that same file. If I step through here, and all these settings are the same, everything's nicely mapped still. So I can just step through it and say finish, and that brings in 2009 records. If I just right clicked and choose run, and I run that, I can run it that way, or if I just double click on it and again, and go straight to finish, I can run it that way too. So by saving that template, it made it really easy to bring in those records. But now that I've run that import process a couple of times, let's go back to the home screen and take a look. Notice I've got 6,000 records instead of the 2,000 records. So this is inherent nature of bulk mailer. It's happy to import records as long as you keep wanting to import them, but it's not going to automatically remove any records. And that's by design because it's not uncommon to have the list owner provide 1 or 2 lists, maybe 3 or 4 files, and say, okay, combine all these together, remove the duplicates, and then we're going to have our master list for this week's mailing. So you can import files from, or you can import addresses from 3 different file types. They all come into the bulk mailer BMF file, and then from here we can do some deduping if we're worried about duplicates, and then end up with a really nice clean master list of all of those input files. But for my purposes here today, I don't want to have all those duplicates in there. So I'm going to go back to the views, and I'm just going to dump all these records again. We'll hit the delete and file, manage deleted records. I'm going to purge them, and then go back in here and just 1, 2, 3 clicks, 4 clicks, and I'm back to where I was. 2009 records cleanly imported from that import list. So these are very handy, these import templates. If you find that you have a recurring job where the list owner is providing you a list, it's the same file type and the same column ordering, so first name, last name, business, etc. Then you're going to want to start saving that import process as a template, and it'll save you a lot of time when it comes time to running jobs. In fact, if you have recurring jobs and you've got templates for importing, templates for mail sorting, templates for exporting all set up, then you can use this job builder function to stitch together each one of those steps into a single job, and you'll be able to run the entire job by just clicking in just a couple of kicking off that job. It'll go through, it'll create, you can set it up to actually create the bulk mailer file itself, then go grab the file out of the hot folder, do the processing, and when it's done processing, export the output to a done folder. So you can actually do quite a bit of automation with bulk mailer. You still have to kind of drive it with the mouse, But once it gets going, it can do the rest of it automatically for you. But again, that's only in the case where you have where you have a recurring job that's got the same kind of file parameters on the input and then the same expected outputs. Okay, so we're back to views. We've talked about sorting, finding and replacing, filtering. So I think we're good on views for now. We're going to go ahead and step forward and go to the address quality steps. And then once we've done some processing and we've got some more interesting data associated with our address or placed into the address records, we'll go back and we'll take a look at some other features in the view screen. So address correction, move update. These are kind of the main processing steps that people do. Address correction is required if you want to get the automation mailing rates. So what it basically does is it takes the address from your input list, compares it to addresses in the USPS data file. If it finds an address that is a high confidence match, then it brings back from that USPS address data things like the zip +4, the delivery point, the line of travel, lots of extra little bits that we need in order to create the automation barcode or the carrier route type mail sorting. And it also validates the address, creates a summary report that shows that you've run what's called the CAS process, or the address validation process, so you can prove to your post office when you're dropping it off that you've done your homework and the addresses have all been validated. If the address fails to be validated, then it's going to get marked with an error code, so they're easy to find. And they can still be mailed. In most cases, you can still mail them, but they'll fall into what's called a non-automation category, and you pay a little bit higher price. They get segregated into separate type of containers, and obviously there's less likelihood they'll get delivered. But for people that are doing like promotional mailings and they just want to get the message out there, they've got lots of stock. It's not expensive to just include those and send them on their way and hope for the best. For people that are doing private mailing, so this would be typically goes as first class, could be medical records, school grade reports, financial information, anything that's private in nature and needs to get to a specific recipient needs to go by first class. And you're going to want to look hard at these error codes that get assigned to the addresses to make sure that you are excluding them from your mailing so that you don't inadvertently mail it to the wrong person. So in the address correction, to run that, we're going to start up. We get the address correction wizard. There's some settings here that we need to go through. If you have questions about these, we have this really well-written help feature. If you notice, we click the help button. It takes us right to the feature in the help menu. So processing options. Here's incremental processing. Here's the explanation right there. Dual address preference, here's the explanation right there. So anytime you're on one of these wizard screens, you're not really sure what it means, do not overlook the help button because it's, like I said, it's very well written and it's context sensitive. It takes you right to the information displayed on the screen. So all records, basically, we'll just leave it on all records. The dual address preference, this one has to do with there's occasionally you'll see addresses where it has both a street address and a P.O. box address. And if you've only got one letter to deliver, you cannot put a single letter into both the P.O. box and into the mailbox out of the street. So you have to tell the program which one is your preferred delivery point. And it's not going to erase the other one, but what it's going to do is whichever one is the preferred option, it's going to move that down to address line 2, and the barcode and the zip +4 and everything is going to be generated to match that address as opposed to the alternate address. This one here that says position bottom just means if whichever one happens to be in address line 2 will be the one considered the preferred address. Again, this only applies to addresses where you have both a P.O. box and a street address. They're pretty rare, but you do see them sometimes. Internet processing, this allows you to just run your processing across the internet, and it has a big advantage these days. We've upgraded about a year ago the program so that if you just want to do address correction online, then it makes the download and update of the program much simpler. If you want to download the big CAS files and do the address processing locally, then your update option requires a 3.5 gigabyte download with all of the USPS data so that it can do its address checking locally. That's That enables you, actually it gives you one extra feature when it comes to checking addresses that's not available if you're doing the online processing. But for most users, online processing is adequate. If you're the kind of user where you expect that you're really going to be drilling down and looking at addresses that fail address correction, and you want to really drill down and look into the USPS data, then you're going to need to have those local address correction files. By the way, this is you'll see this when you're doing your update. When you're doing your bulk matter updates, if you choose the modify option when you go through the updating process, one of the last screen, it'll give you the option of downloading those address correction files locally or just using the online processing. If you've got the local address correction files, then you'll be able to uncheck this box. If you don't have the local address correction files, this is going to be checked and it'll be grayed out. So just so I can show you how this works, we'll go ahead and keep it open. And we're going to check this box here. It says review uncorrected records. Okay, this setting here has to do with the addresses that are where the address is validated to the building, but the apartment or the suite number cannot be validated. It's either missing or incorrect. And so these are kind of in-betweeners. We've got address validation, again, delivery point validation to the building. And it can qualify for automation rates if you want it to. But again, if you're mailing something private in nature, medical bills, again, that kind of thing, you're probably going to want to have this option here where you remove the +4. And what that does is sort of forces the address to be considered a non-corrected address or an invalid address, so that it can be more easily removed from your mailing, and you could put it into a report that you generate and send back to the list owner for for investigation as to why those addresses are not validating. We'll go ahead and leave this one. Most people leave the +4, but again, if you're doing something private in nature, you're probably going to want to check this one that says remove it. Think of it this way: removing the +4 is basically telling the program that this address, I don't want to consider this address a validated address. Even though it's got delivery point validation to the building, the fact that I don't have the apartment number validated is not good enough for me. So that's where you would choose this remove +4 option. These options here, the longitude and latitude, you can have it return that information, or this indicator called the residential address indicator, RDI. If those are add-on features, you'd have to check these boxes, and the program will bring back that additional data. This one here, address correction formatting options. This has to do with how it's going to format and display the data. So you can choose to abbreviate. You can have them printed out in full. The unit information. So this is referring to like the apartment number, the suite number. If you want it to be on a separate line, you check this box. If you want it to be on the same line with the address, then you keep it checked over here. That's the preferred USPS version, is that it's on the delivery line. And then casing. If you're going with mixed casing, one thing we recommend is do not apply casing to the business name, because if you have a business like AAA Plumbing, it's going to come out with capital A followed by 2 lowercase a's. Now, the program has no way of knowing business acronyms across the entire country. So if you're happy with if your list owner provides you the list and it's in mixed case, then assume that they've got it set up the way they like it, and we'll just leave it alone. Don't change it. Same thing with the name fields. Probably safer just to leave it the way it is. Okay, and let's go ahead and do next. Here is the list processor. This would be your organization's information. This prints out on the CAS report, and so it shows the post office that you ran the move up or the address correction processing. While it's doing the processing here, the thing you want to look for on this screen here, this is that review window. The thing you want to look for on this screen is the foreign and errors. So this is showing that of those 2009 addresses, I've got 53 where the program could not, with a high confidence, match an address to a known delivery point. So basically what we say, an uncorrected record, or a record that cannot be validated. So 3%, that's not uncommon. If you get a list with 5 or 10 or more, then there's probably something going on in the list. You might want to go back and review how it was imported. Or again, if it's a really high percentage, then there's definitely something going on with that list that preventing it from being validated. This screen here, this is that this optional review window. because I have the local address, because I have address correction files installed locally, it's going to allow me to go through and double check these addresses and see if I could fix them. Now, it's showing the error code here. These are all 53 of those addresses that failed address correction, and this is the first one. So the error code on this one, primary number invalid. PO box, primary number is the actual PO box. For a house address like 123 Main Street, 123 is the primary number. So that's the address element that it's referring to. With this one here, there's no way, without calling the person and asking what their PO box is, there's no way we're going to know what that is. So we'll just say keep the original on that one. This one, however, might be more interesting. Here, this is 25th Avenue in Brooklyn. If we click the retry button, it's going to bring up the address browser. So this address browser, you need the local address correction files in order to have this. And what it does is it's showing us here on Brooklyn, New York, 25th Avenue. Here are all the valid ranges for addresses on that street. And you'll notice it starts in the 8,000s and works its way up to 8,800. So there are no valid primary numbers on 25th Avenue in Brooklyn that start with 5,000. So that's why the program is saying, look, I can't help you. This is outside of the expected range, and so I cannot validate the address. It marks it with primary number invalid. So again, on that one, not much we can do. So we'll just say keep original. And there's some more, do one more example here. So here's one where the street name is invalid. Sometimes people get the street names in, there's a typo or something like that. Sometimes you can pick it out of the list. So in this case, we're in San Diego, California, and here are all of the street names in San Diego, California. And so if we scroll down to where the K's are, we can see the input address has Keeney Mason Road, and this one here, Kearney Mesa Road, looks like the closest match. So if I click on that, it updates it. Notice the primary matches, and not only that, the secondary falls within the range of A to C. So if I like this, I can go ahead and update it, and then I fix that address. So it came in as Keeney Mason Road, and the working address after we did the correction on it is now Kearney Mesa Road, and now it's giving us an error code of 0, no significant changes. Error code, lower the error code, the better the address. So in this case, any one with an address correction of 0, it means it's a very good address. So we'll go ahead and say accept the working address, and there we've fixed one of the addresses. So that's a demonstration of this thing called the review window. By the way, this process here of checking the addresses and making corrections to it and having it recheck, we can also do that in the view screen as well. So you don't necessarily have to do it right after you've run address correction, but it's built into the program, and I wanted to be able to demonstrate that for you. So I'm going to hit cancel. It's going to go through and update the rest of these records. We're still at about 3% of failed addresses, but that's okay, because the mailing we're doing here today is just a promotional mailing, and I'm not worried about it if a few of them end up in the dumpster. Okay, so we hit close on that, and then let's talk about move update. So move update, kind of similar process, but uses a different database. What we're looking for here is we're going to take the address and the name or business name, and we're going to see if we can match it to a database that the post office maintains for all the people that have submitted a change of address. So this is where it starts. A person submits a change of address, it goes into the national change of address database, and then we come along with our list and we try to match it to an existing submission. So it doesn't look it up on Google or whitepages.com. It doesn't do anything like that, like it's going to try to figure out where this person lives. All we're doing is we're trying to match to a submission that somebody has put into the national change of address database. This one is run online. There is no way to run these locally, so it's always going to be run online. You have to have a login. It also requires what are called move update credits. And so if you talk to your account manager, if you're going to do move update processing, then you'll have to get set up with a move update account and move update credits. There's some options here. These days, the best thing to do is you check for all the moves, search for all names, and 48 months is as far back as you can go, and you want to check for all the way back to 48 months. We also have a review window, which you can turn off, but we'll go ahead and leave that one here, and so we'll see what that looks like. Notice here we've got another one of these address formatting and abbreviation settings. And the reason for this is that Move Update actually runs its own address correction process. It's required by the postal, it's required by the Move Update processing regulation. You have to do Move Update. If you're going to do Move Update, the first thing it does is it goes through and it runs address correction or a CAS process on it. And then all the addresses that succeed through the CAS process then get checked to see if somebody has submitted a change of address. So with that in mind, you can actually skip running address correction as a separate step. If you're in production mode and you're just saying you know you're going to do Move Update processing as part of your list, you can skip running address correction separately and go straight to the Move Update processing. Okay, while this runs, I'm going to take about a 3-minute break here. I'll be right back. Thank you.